Hey guys, Will here. Now you might remember at the end of 2023, I said that Logitech was my biggest disappointment in the sim racing hardware world for the year because they hadn't released any further accessories to expand upon the ecosystem they built with their G Pro wheelbase and pedals. Now fast forward almost another year and we finally have something that we can talk about. They've just announced a whole bunch of new accessories, a couple of new wheel rims, a couple of new hubs, a universal hub as well that allows you to mount any wheel that you want onto the G Pro wheelbase, and a really interesting handbrake and sequential shifter combo unit. So in today's video, I want to try and achieve a couple of things, give you a really good overview of all of these products, all the things that I think you need to know about them. But more importantly, let's revisit this ecosystem with these new accessories in mind today to find out whether this has gone from a good product that was held back by a lack of ecosystem to something that I'm now, again, comfortable to recommend to you guys. A lot to get through, so let's dive in. So to kick off today, firstly, big thank you to Logitech for sending across this gear for us to check out. Now, as is always the case here at Boosted Media, we will be cross-comparing these products against some other competitor products today to give you a better understanding of what might suit your particular needs and budget best. So it's important that you guys are aware that all the gear we'll be talking about in today's video was all sent to us under the exact same conditions. Now, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that you see in today's video or any other sim racing gear, head over to boostedmedia.net. There you'll find a whole bunch of discount codes and affiliate links available. That's a great way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media, as well as saving yourselves some cash in the process as well. Or you can just head down to the description box below this video for a bunch of links as well. So a good place to start today's video is with a quick word on compatibility. Now, just like within the Fanatec ecosystem, PC compatibility is available across the board. So no matter what product you buy, it will be PC compatible. If you want PlayStation compatibility, that compatibility comes from a security chip inside the wheelbase. So that means you need to buy a PlayStation compatible wheelbase if you want to use it on a PlayStation, and any other peripherals that you then connect to that wheelbase will also become PlayStation compatible. Now, conversely, if you want to have Xbox compatibility, that compatibility comes from a security chip inside the steering wheel, or the hub in this case. So what that means is if you buy a PlayStation version of the base and then an Xbox compatible version of the hub or wheel, then you're actually going to have compatibility across the board. So what I would recommend is, if you're looking at buying into this ecosystem, think very carefully about whether you're likely to ever want to be able to play on a PlayStation. If, for example, say an exclusive title comes out that's only available on PlayStation, not available on PC and Xbox, then you may well find that you want to play that and you're just not going to be able to if you buy the Xbox and PC version of the wheelbase. So just make sure you're aware of that. Now, one thing that they have done, and hopefully this will be live by the time you guys are seeing this video, is made their wheelbases available as a standalone product. It was all a little bit complicated before because you kind of had to make a decision and that then determined the path that you took with the steering wheel as well. But they are now going to be selling the PlayStation compatible base on its own, which is a very good thing. So just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that. So we've got two new wheel rims here that both come in at 290mm diameter compared with the 300mm diameter that we had with the original wheel. So we've got the RS round wheel and the RS track wheel. Those both come in at $69.99 US. We then have a couple of new hubs here as well. As you can see, this one has the Xbox logo on it. Now the two of these guys are mechanically identical to each other than just the Xbox buttons that you'll find on the Xbox version, and of course the security chip inside the Xbox version for Xbox compatibility. So even though this guy is labeled as PC compatible, if you have the PlayStation compatible version of the base, you will also have PlayStation compatibility with this guy as well. So if you know you're not going to be wanting to use it on an Xbox, then this guy would be the go. The pricing for these guys is at $129.99 for the PC version and $149.99 for the Xbox version. We then have the RS QR adapter, which we'll dive into in more detail in just a second. Of course, this guy is only PC compatible, even if you have the PlayStation version of the base, and that is simply because there are no physical buttons attached to this at all. So there is no PlayStation button on this that you can press to then pair your wheel with the console. So that is the reason why there's no PlayStation compatibility there. I'm going to move this over to the side here to show you the handbrake and shifter combo unit. Now this is really interesting, really excited to show you the details on this guy. So these come in at $149.99 US dollars. And as you'll see a little bit later on in today's video, you can actually combine two of them, use one as a shifter and one as a handbrake, or just use the one and switch between handbrake or sequential shifter mode if you wish to use it that way and save yourselves a bit of cash as well. So that's a quick rundown on the pricing of the products that we have in front of us here. Now they have also announced, but won't be releasing until they're predicting January 2025, a couple of new wheels that are made in partnership with Momo, who most of you guys I'm sure are familiar with from real life performance and motorsport parts. So they're going to be releasing two new wheels which have a expected MSRP of $199. There's going to be a Sim GT wheel, which is 320mm diameter, and then a Sim GT racer wheel as well, which will be 290mm diameter. So excited to share more details on those once they're available. But for now, at least you guys can see a couple of product images that have been supplied by Logitech to give you an idea of what to expect. So let's start off with the RS track wheel. So as I said before, 290 millimeters in diameter, which is a pretty good sweet spot for overall versatility. And obviously you're not going to be doing rallying or drifting with a wheel of this kind of design. But as I always say in my wheel review, somewhere around 290 or 300 millimeter diameter is, in my opinion, the sweet spot for overall versatility. There's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, the smaller the diameter of the wheel, the more precise the force feedback tends to feel. As you go bigger, you start to get a more damping effect on the force feedback, and you have more leverage overall, which just weakens the effect of force feedback. Now, obviously with the G Pro wheelbase that this is intended for use with, that's not really going to be a problem anyway, because you've got 11 Newton meters of dynamic range available. So 290 millimeter diameter, or 291 millimeters to be exact, 40 millimeter thickness at the thickest part of the grips here as well. Now, this grip material is actually really cool. One of the better feeling materials I think I've ever felt on any sim racing wheel, including the super expensive ones that we test here at Boosted Media quite frequently. So that is really saying something. And that's going to be a bit of a theme that you'll see carried on throughout today's video. Logitech have obviously taken their sweet time in developing these products, as we know, but they really do demonstrate an understanding of what sim racers actually want and what suits our needs best with these products. So really happy to see that. These grips are actually made of TPE, or thermoplastic elastomer material. And you can see it's got this kind of dotted pattern here, which gives it a little bit of breathability in your hands. But with or without gloves, these are extremely comfortable to drive with. There's a little bit of squish there. They're not super squishy, but they do feel nice and smooth under hands. You guys would have seen me saying a lot of my wheel reviews, a lot of wheels these days are using this kind of sticky material that does grip your hands quite nicely, at least until they get sweaty, but it has a tendency to pick up dirt and debris, dead skin cells from your hands and gross things like that. Whereas these wheels, as you can see, they still look absolutely fresh even after I've been using this wheel for probably about 10 hours now. So yeah, really impressed with the grip material. Now you can see the core of the wheel is constructed with this beautiful anodized aluminium with a brushed finish. And this is 3 millimeter thick material. Now, one thing that we did notice, and those with a keen eye might have already picked up as well, it is very thin in terms of material thickness around these button holes here. Now, we did initially notice when we put this on the wheel, there was quite a bit of flex. Then I realized later on, if you flip the wheel around, there are actually some little screw holes in the back here, and those actually correspond with some holes on the back of these hubs. So what that allows you to do is actually put one of the included screws, which I was wondering what they were actually for, through into these holes, and that fixes it down so it's absolutely rigid. Now, the flex wasn't really noticeable when driving anyway, but look, this is just another thing that goes into that theme I was talking about before, where they've obviously taken the time to really understand that that's something that wasn't going to be acceptable to a lot of people, and they've taken steps to mitigate that issue. So again, taking their sweet time developing these products, but that kind of attention to detail is something that we seldom see here at Boosted Media, even on far more expensive products. So that is something that I was really impressed by. Very good to see. So in terms of materials, we've got the same 3 millimeter thick anodized brushed aluminium core. We then have what I believe is some sort of a faux leather material wrapping around the outside. Now, some of their previous products, they did have genuine leather. They specifically avoided saying that in the marketing materials here. So if I have a look at the notes here, it says, built to last, from inception, RS round wheels materials were selected to maximize its lifespan and reduce environmental impact without ever compromising on product performance. Designed with low carbon aluminium, RS round wheel is made with renewable energy rather than fossil fuels, beautiful with lower carbon impact. So there you go, straight from the horse's mouth there. But what I can tell you from a reviewer's perspective is that it is a very nice feeling material. It does feel like genuine leather in the hand. It's got an almost slightly, not sticky, but kind of grippy sensation to it, which is quite interesting. But in my experience using the wheel, I can tell you it does actually work really nicely. It's almost I would say the perfect, and I don't use that word lightly, but it's the perfect material for allowing the wheel to slip through your hands, particularly for drifting, as you can see in this footage here. The wheel slips through your hands really nicely with just the right amount of grip, so that when you want to grip the wheel again, stop that rotation, it just works really nicely. Even with the stitching, all really nice and smooth. A lot of other wheels that come in a lot more expensive than this one don't have the same quality of stitching that we see here, particularly if you have a look at some of Moser Racing's wheels. Even though they have a lot of features on them, that just the quality of the materials and the workmanship isn't quite on the same level as what we see here. I would say this is more similar to what we see in some of the custom rims that we see from Fanatec, for example, just to give you a point of reference there if you happen to own any of those wheels. So very impressed with the material choice and the quality here. 290 millimeter diameter, once again with a 35 millimeter thickness all the way around the grip of the wheel. There's no sort of ergonomic indents or anything like that, which I actually think works really nicely. It's very comfortable to hold in the hands, and it makes it very easy to slide around and grip in any position without it sort of wanting to sort of fall into a particular position in your hands. So very well designed. And again, again, even though we have that thin material area around the grips here, which did introduce quite a bit of flex when we tried to make it flex, we do have those screw holes once again, as I described before, that fix that issue. So there's no meaningful flex there whatsoever. So again, a very clean design there. You can see the little center ring there as well for drifting and rally style driving. And yeah, just a very nice, clean design. So what we have here is a pretty standard looking quick release design. We're going to get into more details around the quick release itself when we talk about these hubs, and we'll do some comparisons between this and those, because there are a couple of subtle differences that I did notice both in how they're constructed and how they operate. But essentially what we have here is just a basic hub with a 50.8mm bolt pattern and a 70mm bolt pattern that allow us to mount pretty much any wheel we want onto the face of this, remembering again that we won't have PlayStation or Xbox compatibility using this. Now, interestingly, there is a little 4-pin header internally there, but I don't know what protocol they're actually using for connecting the wheels through to the wheelbase. I don't know whether it is just standard USB protocol or whether they're using some sort of proprietary protocol. Given that it's Logitech, I would imagine they probably are using something proprietary. So I don't think it's going to be simple as just wiring up any USB wheel that you want to that header, but that header is there. So hopefully we get some more information on that later on. I did ask them about it and they said that it was for internal use only, but Logitech do tend to keep their secrets pretty close to their chest. So there's probably more to that story that we might find out later on down the line. Now, if I quickly grab the little bag of nuts and bolts that were included with it, there's a couple of important things that I want to show you here. So with the 50.8mm bolt pattern that we have on the front here, those are all threaded holes, so you can only bolt in from the front. They've done something really clever with the 70mm bolt pattern though. As you can see here, there are no threads on these holes, and they've included two different types of fasteners here. So you've got your tapered fasteners like this, which allow you to go in from the back of the quick release and screw into a wheel, and you can see those sit nice and flush in the tapered recess in the anodized aluminium there. But they've also included some little nylock nuts and some standard bolts here as well. So you can see there's a recess in there that is shaped the same as the nut. So the nut slots into that little recess. It's going to be a little bit fidgety to do on camera. There we go. And then that allows us to screw in through the front. We don't have to get a spanner behind it, which can be really awkward on a lot of wheels to try and secure it in place. So if you've got a really sort of tight space, you can imagine if you've got shifters and things all going on around there, you don't have to have a tool in behind that. You can just secure it in from the front. So again, a really clever design there that I think they've obviously put a lot of time and effort into refining. I really like the blue anodizing there as well. It just looks really clean and classy. Now, a couple of other quick things that you do need to be aware of here. The total height of this guy is 90mm. One thing that we did observe when we used this with certain wheels is that because the wheel ends up sitting relatively close to the wheelbase on this, the cable can actually drag around the front of the wheelbase. You can see here we were using the McLaren Artura wheel, and you can see the cable was actually fouling on the front of that. Now, that's of course not going to be the case with every single wheel out there, and it's impossible to test absolutely everything. But you could of course just add a spacer with a 70mm PCD in between the wheel and the hub, and that will mitigate that issue if you come across that. Again, just something that I wanted you guys to be aware of. So on to the RS wheel hubs now. And as we mentioned before, the only mechanical difference between these is just the appearance of the buttons and the fact that the Xbox compatible one has the Xbox security chip in it for Xbox compatibility. One thing that I did appreciate even on PC is that the ABXY buttons do actually show up in the game as ABXY, which makes navigating through menus and things a lot more easy. And one of the things that Logitech really do absolutely nail is just that ease of use across the entire spectrum, Xbox, PC, and PlayStation. Immediately upon launching any game with these products without any sort of calibration or configuration at all the navigations in menus and everything for most titles at least worked straight out of the box. The little 5-way switch here works straight out of the box to navigate through menus, and it's just a really well refined and seamless experience overall. One thing I will say is that you don't have the ability to actually replace the button caps on these, so you are stuck with the labels that these buttons come with, which is a little bit disappointing. They do include an assortment of sticker sheets here, as you can see, in a variety of different colors, but those aren't intended to actually stick over the text on the buttons themselves. It's something that you can stick on the wheel around those buttons. So a good little inclusion there, but it would have been nicer in my opinion to see replaceable button caps like what we have on Fanatec's Club Sport Universal Hub, although in fairness their CSL hub doesn't actually have replaceable button caps on the newer version. So we'll take a look at this in more detail in just a second. But let's just quickly run through functionality here. I'm going to set the PC and PlayStation 1 aside here and just focus in on the Xbox version just for simplicity here. So the buttons themselves do have a nice clicky feel to them, nothing particularly special, but you wouldn't expect anything particularly amazing at the price point. One thing I did notice is that the buttons do tend to rattle quite a bit if you like to have true force turned up. Running at reasonable levels of around about 20%, it is absolutely fine, but if you crank it up, it sounds a little bit more like this. Now I'm just gonna bring up the original G Pro wheel here just for some side-by-side comparison as we go through here as well. So you can see the button layout is for the most part pretty much identical. But one thing that I did really appreciate is they've added an additional button here on either side. One of the complaints I had about the original wheel is that there was only a single button on either side. So you could use it as a minus and a plus, for example, but with this new configuration here, it actually makes it really convenient to say up and down for your brake bias and your fuel map, in addition, of course, to all the other buttons that we have available here. So that was definitely an update that I found very practical. Now, another thing you might have noticed if you've got a keen eye is this little strip along the top here. Now, they tell us one of the major complaints that a lot of people had about the original wheel is that it didn't have an RPM strip along the top here. The RPM strip was present, but it's actually part of the wheelbase. What they've done now is move the RPM strip onto the top of the hub here. When you have one of these hubs connected, it disables the RPM strip on the wheelbase, so you're not doubling up. And there are a couple of different modes available within the software to change the pattern here. So you can go from left to right, right to left, inside out, or outside in. The only other mechanical difference here that you can see is just the relocation of that encoder from the front, as you saw it on the original wheel, to the side now. Those both do still have push button functionality, and they do have a nice tactile, clicky feel to them, either with or without gloves, which is absolutely fine. The little four-way switch here has a nice clicky feel to it as well. Not really anything particularly remarkable or complaint-worthy about that. It just does what it does. Comparing that, of course, to the Fanatec ecosystem, they do have a 7-way switch here, so that gives you push button functionality in addition to left, right, up, down, as well as rotary encoder functionality. You don't have that on these particular hubs, so just in case you were wondering about that. As you can see, it does just have a standard 70mm bolt pattern here. We will come back to that in just a second because there's a couple of important considerations there. And then if we flip the wheel around, you'll notice there is one obvious thing missing here. If we go back to the original wheel, you can see this did have analog paddles, which you could map to a bite point clutch or as a throttle and brake or a handbrake if you wanted to. As you can see on these new hubs, that is no longer the case. Now, that is something that I questioned directly with the portfolio manager at Logitech for simulation and controllers, and I'll get back to his answers of that and a couple of other questions in just a moment for you guys. But yeah, no analog paddles on these hubs, which is a little bit unfortunate. You are still gonna have to stick with the original G Pro wheel if you wanted to have that functionality. So flipping back around to the front of the wheel again now, and this is where things start to get a little bit more limiting. Now, obviously we already talked about the fact that they've released 2 of their own rims, which are obviously directly compatible with this hub, and there will be those Momo rims that we mentioned earlier releasing early in 2025 as well. Now, the design of the hub does unfortunately limit its universal compatibility. And you guys with a keen eye have probably already spotted how the Xbox button, the light, the 5-way switch, and these 2 side switches here on either side do actually block the space for the rim. So obviously any wheel that you're going to be using with it is going to have cutouts for those. Now, you can of course drill holes in your own third-party wheel if you want to, but it's not something that most people are going to be willing to do. The bigger limitation here is the fact that the wheel is actually recessed in, as you can see. So it sits behind these structures around the top and bottom. So what that means is if your wheel doesn't match this shape exactly or come in a little bit smaller than this, you're not actually going to be able to bolt it onto the hub at all without some kind of spacer, which is just going to look a little bit janky in all honesty. So to just give you an example here, this is a Sparco rally wheel. This is actually the genuine wheel that you would find in the Ford Puma rally car. And as you can see, even though the bolt pattern lines up, there's no way that's going to get in there. And even if it did, even if we did have cutouts, it still wouldn't fit within the confines of that. So if we compare that quickly to the design of, say, the Fanatec Club Sport Universal Hub, you can see this looks kind of a little bit crazy. It's got a lot of stuff going on, and I actually don't like the look of this design, but what they've done here does actually make this very, very versatile and very universal. So you've got your standard 70mm and 50mm bolt patterns on the front here. You don't have a 50mm bolt pattern on this guy. You've then got an assortment of buttons here as well as a display which allows you console compatibility, even if you have just a dumb wheel with no buttons at all bolted to the front of it. You then also have cluster packs here as well. So you've got buttons that you can actually pull the caps off and relabel if you want to. You've got your Xbox button down the bottom here, and all of these guys can be moved around. They can be switched to different positions, and the wheel basically just sits on the front of it. And as you can see, if I grab the Sparco wheel again, that guy can go in there. You can then move those buttons around to any position that you want. That works nicely with the wheel. So overall, I mean, look, it is somewhat subjective in terms of whether you like the look of this or prefer the look of something nice and clean like this. I do much prefer the look of this wheel when it's paired with one of their compatible wheels. But in terms of adaptability, versatility, and just being universal, I think this definitely does a better job overall, and obviously in terms of compatibility as well, although of course you are paying for it with that particular hub. Now they also do have the CSL hub as well. I'm not going to pull the wheel off this guy. You guys can see the full review of this for more details, but again, you can see you've got much more clearance around the top of the rim here, and you can actually move these cluster packs in and out on this particular wheel. Now the shifters and all those details don't feel anywhere near as nice on this as they do on the Logitech, in fairness, and we'll come back to those shifters in just a moment. But again, you can see the display here. This will work with PlayStation on a PlayStation compatible base as well. And just overall, more versatility here and a little bit more universal than what we have with the Logitech hub. So look, I mean, one of the things that they said in their presentation to all the reviewers was that they were trying to make this as open as they possibly can. But yeah, it would have been nice if perhaps this was a little bit more universally compatible, although that would come at the cost of course, aesthetics when it's paired with one of their wheels. So look, they're very aware of their target market and the way people use their products. That's again going to tie into the answers to some of the questions that I asked them a little bit later on. But for now, let's spin it around and just quickly talk about the shifters as well. As you can see, nice brushed aluminium finish on those. We do have neodymium magnets in behind there as well, so they do have a nice magnetic snap to them. You can see there is a little bit of adjustment available here too, so you can undo those screws and slide in or slide out the paddles depending on the wheel that you're going to be using. So that's a nice touch as well. And that is pretty much everything that you need to know about the hubs, just with the exception of the quick release. So I just want to quickly talk a little bit about that because there was one really important observation that I made here, and that is that the original wheel, one of the things that I really liked about this was the fact that when you pull the handle, it releases the mechanism and it actually stays in that released position. So what that means is that when you put the wheel back onto the base, as you can see here, it just clicks into place and you don't have to pull the quick release awkwardly to put the wheel on. So I really liked the way that worked on the original wheel. Now the design is exactly the same with the universal hub that we have here as well, although I'm not 100% certain whether the final retail units will be like that, because I know that this is a early production or a late prototype that we have here. So we'll let you guys know. We will be receiving a final production one of these. I'll let you know if there is any difference there, but otherwise functionality should be exactly the same. Now with these new hubs, unfortunately, you can see if we have a look in the back here, the original wheel had this little notch on the back. You can see now the mechanism has slightly changed and it's got a little pin here instead. Now you'll notice that when we pull the quick release, although it does have a really nice smooth action to it, it actually does feel a lot nicer than Fanatec's QR1. You can see now it doesn't actually latch in the open position. And what that means is that when you go to slide these wheels back onto the wheelbase, you do actually have to pull that quick release, pop the wheel on and then let go of it rather than just pushing the wheel directly on. So I was a little bit disappointed by that. And this was another question that I asked of the portfolio manager. His response was pretty default Logitech response, as I've come to expect. He said with regard, and there was a bit of other chat around here as well, but the bit that's important is with regards to the features of the wheel hub, as you say, user testing and feedback plus analysis of usage data on the Pro wheel are a huge influence on everything we do. All decisions are made with a keen eye on striking the right balance of user experience and requirement and the product position in the range, plus what's coming later. So he's very, very carefully avoided answering my question directly there, which was a little bit disappointing, but obviously they have a lot of user data there. They would have all the information on product returns and failures and everything like that as well. So maybe this is a little bit more robust than the other design. I don't know, that is pure speculation, but obviously there must be some sort of reason why they've made that change. The important thing for you guys to know is that it is a little bit different with regards to how it mounts to the wheelbase. Now that also becomes important because obviously changing the wheel was a bit of a moot point before because you only had the one wheel. Now that we have these new wheels, people are going to be wanting to interchange them more frequently, so that becomes a much more important piece of the user experience. One other thing I do just want to quickly mention here before we move on to the shifter as well is that a lot of people will be comparing this, I know, to the design of Fanatec's QR1, which is now superseded by the QR2, and a lot of people did have issues with that QR1 having a little bit of wiggle or slop in it and leading to things like pin failure, for example. The design of this guy actually uses pogo pins, which are spring-loaded, so the pins aren't actually slotting into any receptacle. You can check out our full review of the G Pro wheelbase for all the details on that, but it does appear to be a fundamentally more reliable design than what we see on the QR1. And it also doesn't have the same issues with free play in the quick release. There is a tiny little bit there. Look, we've tested probably over 150 different combinations with QR1 wheels and bases over the years. And look, the amount of movement does vary from wheel to wheel and base to base just because of manufacturing tolerances, but I can tell you confidently every single combination that I've ever tested there has had more movement in it than what we have with any of these wheels in the Logitech ecosystem. So I don't think that's going to be a problem for anybody. But of course, let us know in the comments down below if your experience varies from that. So there are a couple of other things that I do want to touch on with regards to the hubs and wheels when we get into the driving experience later on. But for now, let's move on and take a more detailed look at this new combo shifter and handbrake unit. Now it is a sequential shifter and handbrake only, doesn't have an H pattern shifter. One of the questions that was asked in the conference that we had with Logitech a couple of days ago was, do they have a G Pro line H pattern shifter in the works? And again, they gave a very cryptic answer without really answering the question, which was they're aware of the things that people want, and they wanted to focus on the things that were actually missing in their current lineup to begin with. So of course, they haven't had a sequential shifter or a handbrake available at all until now. They've only had their driving force H pattern shifter, so they wanted to do this first. I assume that means that there will be an H pattern coming at some point, but they certainly didn't commit to anything when they answered the question, which again is what we've come to expect from Logitech. But nonetheless, we do have a G Pro line shifter and handbrake now, and I've got to say I'm pretty darn impressed with how this works overall. Now, the best way to look at this, I mean, obviously you guys have seen here at Boosted Media, we've reviewed a lot of different types of handbrakes and shifters, varying from, you know, ridiculously expensive all the way through to very cheap, get the job done kind of stuff. This sits kind of in the sort of low to mid level of, you know, that grand scale of products. What they've tried to do here is make this as adaptable and versatile as they possibly can, provide a good overall driving feel for a very good price point. And I would say with those kind of parameters in mind, I think they've done a really good job here. So let's just have a quick look at exactly how this guy works. So in the configuration that we have it at the moment, it is in handbrake mode. You pull down on the lever and it does have quite a nice, almost fluid feeling to it. It does have some mechanical resistance behind it. Yeah, as you can see in the driving footage here, you can really get into it, pull on it really hard. It's got a kind of two-stage effect going on. So the first phase is quite linear, and then when you get into it, there's a second phase right down the bottom, and that's where you can really get in, modulate that input, and really control the slip angle of the car for games that obviously support an analog input. Now on that subject, you can see a little switch down the bottom here for sequential mode, which is what we have it in the switch at the moment, and this is just an electronic switch. We'll get into how you actually mechanically switch over between the modes in just a second. So you've got your sequential mode, you've got your digital handbrake mode, and that is for games that don't support an analog input for the handbrake. So say for example on the PlayStation 5, I tried out Dirt 4, I think it was, might have been Dirt 5, and that didn't recognize an analog handbrake. So nonetheless, we were able to switch it into digital mode, and it worked absolutely fine for the context of that game. And then of course, the third position is analog handbrake mode, as just described. So you might be wondering about compatibility, and that is a very good question. So it does have a standard USB connection on it. You can connect it directly to your PC and just run it as a shifter or a handbrake. You can of course plug it into the USB ports available on the back of the G Pro direct drive wheelbase as well, and it will work that way. So in that sense, it's compatible on PC regardless of what other hardware you might have on your rig, or if you're on a PlayStation or Xbox, you can connect it in through that G Pro wheel. Now, if you are on console, don't have a G Pro wheelbase, but do have a G29, G920 or G923, you can use the G Pro racing adapter to connect this as well. So what you would do in that case is connect this to the USB port on the shifter handbrake module, and then connect this through to the wheelbase. In that case, you will be limited to using the handbrake in digital only mode, not in analog mode. The shifters are actually linked to the up and down shifter paddles on the wheel, so that is how that works. So there's a couple of things that you can do here mechanically. You can loosen off this collar, and that's going to allow you to move up or down the handle on the handbrake. You can actually remove it entirely if you wish to as well. We'll just quickly unscrew that so you guys can see. Unfortunately, it isn't a standard sort of thread here, so it's not going to be easy to replace the knobs. But those of you who are creative, I'm sure will come up with ways around that, and I'm interested to see what you guys do come up with. So I'm sure we'll see all sorts of interestingly shaped handles on these in no time. So just measuring this quickly allows us to take the handle up and down by about 50 millimeters, or a total handle length here, crudely, from the top of the base from about 160 millimeters up to 210 or thereabouts millimeters, for those who might be wondering about that. Now, the other thing, of course, we can do is switch mechanically between handbrake mode and sequential shifter mode. So as we talked about before, that is the handbrake mode. We'll talk about the driving experience with it in a little bit more detail in just a moment. We're just going to tighten that up now, and let's loosen off the handle. So literally all we have to do to switch between the handbrake and shifter mode is just unscrew the handle. And once this is unscrewed, I'll show you how this works inside. So we'll take that off. You can see there's a thread here with a taper at the end, so you're not going to be screwing this in too far and causing any damage over time. Obviously, they've thought about that as well. There is a little plastic or Teflon sleeve there as well. And then inside here, you can see there's actually 2 holes. So the one that's got the blue ring around it is our slot for shifter mode. So all we do then is we take the handle in here, pop it in, screw it all the way down until it hits that taper that we talked about before. There we go, that is nice and solidly in there. There's no sort of ambiguity in terms of whether it's screwed in far enough. It does sort of reach a hard stop once it's screwed all the way in, which again is a good thing to see. Greatly lowers the risk of somebody not threading it in properly and then pulling on it and damaging the threads. So we've done that, then we just need to tell the electronics that we're wanting to use sequential mode. And now we've got a nice sequential shift movement in either direction. Again, we can raise or lower that handle by the 50 millimeters that we discussed just before. And in sequential mode, again, it's got a really nice, almost fluid feeling to it. Look, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that it feels as authentic as some of the crazy expensive sequential shifters that we've tested here at Boosted Media, but it does have a very nice feeling to it overall. And look, if this was the shifter that I had to run on my daily driver rig, I honestly would be absolutely fine with it. It gives all the feedback that I need, a good amount of throw there in either direction as well. And yeah, I just really don't have any complaints about it. I would say, if anything, just the actual engagement of the click. So you can see as I pull down, as it clicks, could maybe be a little bit stiffer, and there doesn't appear to be any sort of mechanical adjustments that we can make here, at least officially, to adjust the feel of it overall. But that said, I think, again, they've hit a pretty good sweet spot here for what's going to suit the majority of people, and we'll unpack that a little bit more when we get into the driving details in just a minute. So we'll take the top cover off this in a second and give you a look at how things actually work internally, but I'm sure you guys are wondering, how do we actually mount this to the rig? Now, they've done something pretty darn cool here. This is the table clamp which they include inside the box. And you can see there's a couple of different sets of holes on this table clamp on the top and the side here, as well as a couple of sets of holes on the back and on the bottom of this unit. That allows us to move the position of the unit forward and back, or up and down respectively. So what you would do is you would mount this on the back like so, and then you would slide this onto your table and clamp it down. Now, a couple of things that I did notice is that this doesn't actually close all the way down. There's about a 5 or 6 millimeter gap in there. So you will need to have a material thickness of at least that to mount this to. Anything thinner than that is probably going to be flexing like crazy anyway, so not really a problem there. We did have to get a little bit creative to mount this onto our aluminium profile rig. It does seem from the design that they're primarily designing these things to be used on a table or in conjunction with the playseat cockpits that we've had a look at here previously on the channel. That certainly doesn't mean that you can't mount it in other ways. It just would have been nice if they did include some sort of a mounting plate as well that would just make it easily boltable to an aluminium profile cockpit, or a standardized hole pattern on the bottom here that you could literally just bolt it straight onto with. This isn't a hole pattern that we've seen on any other sim racing equipment before. I'm sure that rig manufacturers at some point will end up using this same hole pattern or making it available on their rigs, but for now you will have to get a little bit creative if you're trying to mount it onto a cockpit. But there is one other really cool thing that you can do here. So I'm just going to set this table clamp aside and grab one that I have prepared earlier. If you buy a second combo unit, what you can do is you can utilize the holes on the top here to actually stack them like this, and then that gives you a pretty convenient way of having a handbrake on the top and a shifter down the bottom without them interfering with each other. It is a little bit awkward in some scenarios. I do find that I tend to pull down on the handbrake, and I do tend to hit my forearm on this part here. And look, originally when I put it on the rig, I was a little bit, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this. And then I kind of thought about the design. I'm like, well, how could they actually make this any better whilst retaining the, I guess, the versatility that we have here? And look, I couldn't come up with a better solution, honestly. So I think they've done a really good job here, again, of, you know, trying to make something that is as universal as possible, can be mounted on a table and work quite well. Now, obviously the rigidity here is going to depend on the strength of your table. On our rig, which we specifically designed to not have any flex in it at all, there is a little bit of movement just sort of in the rubber pads of the mounting solution. So look, it's not completely flex free, but at the tension levels that we have for the shifter and the handbrake, it's not kind of just slopping around all over the place either. So look, while it certainly isn't the best shifter or handbrake that we've ever tested here at Boosted Media, I think putting it in the correct context for the price that you're paying, they have done a really good job. And I just want to quickly grab the Thrustmaster TSS shifter and handbrake combo unit just to give you a bit of a comparison here. Now look, I was never particularly impressed with this thing. The shifter mechanism to me just doesn't feel very authentic at all, whereas this does have a nice snap in either position. You can see this one just feels a lot more like activating a switch than actually mechanically working something inside a transmission. In handbrake mode, this one does feel quite good. It does have a little bit of additional versatility in terms of how you can mount the actual arm. There are a couple of other brackets and bits and pieces that are included in the box, and we will be taking a more detailed look at this pretty soon because we do have a bunch of Thrustmaster reviews coming up. So subscribe if you haven't already to make sure you don't miss out on those. And look, versatility wise as well, it does require tools to switch it between handbrake and sequential mode, unlike what we have here as well. So this is something that you're far more likely to sort of switch between the two on your rig day to day, whereas this is something that's going to require a little bit more effort, to the point where a lot of people we find just don't end up bothering doing it. You know, if you just want to quickly do a little bit of drifting before bed or something, you go, oh, I can't really be bothered changing this over to a handbrake. I'm just going to let it go for tonight. Whereas this, you know, a couple of seconds, just unscrew it, pop it in, flick the switch, and you're done. And I think that is an important thing to note there. So look, this isn't a bad product, but it is also quite a lot more expensive than what this guy is as well. So let's just quickly pop the cover off here, have a look at how it works internally, and then we'll move on and talk about the driving experience with all of this new stuff. So we've managed to get the clothes off here for a bit of a look inside. At the moment, we're in handbrake configuration, and we can see here how the mechanism works. So as we pull on the lever, basically there's a little spring here which extends, and you can see that is what provides the force fighting back against you. If you have a look on the side here as well, you can see all the bits and pieces moving internally, and another little spring on this side, as well as our electronics package. Now it looks pretty obvious here, unless I'm grossly mistaken, that there is no load cell. I think what we have down here is a little magnet, and I'm assuming there must be a Hall effect sensor on the PCB just underneath that. I'm not really confident pulling it apart any further than this because I want it to all go back together and work exactly the same way as before. But you can see as we pull the handbrake down, there is a little bit of movement on that arm there. So I'm assuming that must be what is detected as the input inside the game. So yeah, if we look down inside here, literally you can see it's just a little arm that extends down, which is connected to the mechanism around these springs. And that is pretty much all there is to it in terms of the handbrake. So let's unscrew this guy again and put it into sequential shifter mode. And in this configuration, again, you can see it is relying to an extent on that same spring assembly down the bottom. So when we pull it in either direction, that spring is loaded in either direction. You can see all the grease that's all in and around there. Hopefully that doesn't take on too much dirt and debris over time. But you can see it does have this plastic cover which sits over the top of the entire assembly, and then this secondary one as well. So really the only place that dirt and debris can get in is just through this top part here. So I don't think that it's going to get too grungy over time, but obviously we'll see how these things stand the test of time. One of the reasons they said why it has taken so long to develop these products is because they wanted to make sure that they were absolutely bulletproof. And look, historically, at least in my experience, and feel free to let us know if you feel differently in the comments down below, but we've always found Logitech products to be very reliable. I had a G25 that I abused for about 15 years, and honestly, it never missed a beat. So I'm pretty confident in saying that. So yeah, mechanism down the bottom once again, and you can see again, if we look at the electronics package here, as we move that lever in either position, that little piece there is still moving. And I don't see any other electronic componentry, mechanical switches or anything like that anywhere else internally, unless I am mistaken, and I well could be. This is just my own observation here, nothing that they've told us. But I believe what's happening here is it's just detecting the position of the magnet relative to that Hall effect sensor that we looked at before. And that must be determining the activation of the switch in either direction. And that would make sense here because of course we've got that little mechanical switch down the bottom, and that allows us to switch between sequential digital handbrake or analog handbrake. So that all kind of just makes sense. But then the other piece of the puzzle here, as you can see, are these two little pieces here. And what I believe those are, again, without pulling it apart because I don't want to break it, I think they're a little spring-loaded ball bearing mechanism. That's what we've seen in some other shifters. And what that's doing is it's popping in and out of a little indentation in the mechanism here and allowing it to, in addition to the spring force here, feel like it's actually popping in and out of a gear. So I believe that's what those pieces are without pulling it apart any further. And then we do have those little rubber bump stops on either side, which you can see provide a nice cushioned end stop without any metal-to-metal contact, and that does keep the noise relatively low as well. So yeah, I mean, you guys can judge for yourselves. You don't need me to tell you, but to me, with my semi-trained eye with these kinds of things, although it has been a long time since I've been in the electronics business, admittedly, I don't see anything here that screams, you know, problems or anything like that. The only concern that I have would literally just be the greased components in here taking on dirt and debris over time and potentially, you know, getting a little bit grindy, but we'll just have to see how it stands the test of time. But again, with all these covers and everything on it, I don't really see that being a significant issue. We'll just have to see. But there you have it, guys. That is the shifter and handbrake combo unit. Let's move on now and talk about the driving experience overall with all of this new gear and what it means for the ecosystem overall. So now that you have an overview of all of these new products, let's talk more about what the overall driving experience is like, both with these products and with the ecosystem as a whole now. So when we originally did our review of the G Pro ecosystem, we were really impressed with the quality of the force feedback. Obviously, they really kind of brought True Force into its own as well. Remember, originally when True Force came out with the Logitech G923, it was a little bit gimmicky, it was a little bit underwhelming, well, maybe a lot gimmicky actually. It added a lot of complexity to what you were feeling through the wheel, but not necessarily anything that was actually useful detail that would make you faster around a track. When the G Pro wheelbase came out, I commented that it kind of went from being a gimmick to something that was genuinely pretty awesome. And it's even now to this day, 2 years after that wheelbase initially launched, sim racing titles that actually make use of True Force feel absolutely fantastic on those G Pro wheelbases. So really in terms of the quality of the force feedback, they really are in line with pretty much the rest of the market there. And in some cases, I would even go as far as to say they have the best quality feedback, particularly ACC or Assetto Corsa Competizione on Xbox or PlayStation. The force feedback there just feels so much better than anything else that's available at this point in time, at least in my testing. We are still, of course, waiting for Fanatec if they ever do end up releasing full force on the DD Plus and CSDD, but we'll just have to wait and see. At this point in time, Logitech really do have the upper hand. And that was one of the reasons why I said last year that I was so disappointed with Logitech for not releasing more accessories like this, because they had such a good core product, but it was just so hard to recommend that product when it was so limited in its wider ecosystem, what you could do with it. So this really does open things up and make Logitech a proper contender within that space. So look, in terms of the actual driving experience, it's been genuinely refreshing going back to this G Pro ecosystem and just the ease of use that it presents, not only on consoles where things tend to be pretty straightforward anyway for console compatible devices, although they are somewhat limited within sim racing at least, but even on PC, just loading up the wheel, you plug it in, like a lot of modern games do these days when you connect a PlayStation controller, for example. All the controls automatically map to that controller, for the most part at least anyway. So you actually see inside most AAA games at least that the buttons that are on the steering wheel actually correspond with their labels inside the game, which is pretty rare and does make it much more intuitive and straightforward to use. And for that reason, you know, if I was considering buying a relatively high-end setup for a kid, then this would probably be where I was going. If I was setting up a rig for my son, for example, I would be setting it up with this G Pro gear. It means that if he wants to play Xbox or PS5, it just works. If we want to plug it into the PC, again, it just kind of works. And, you know, there's a lot to be said for that. It's not something that's important to a lot of more hardcore sim racers, but for the more casual sim racer or those who have kids that they don't want to have to sort of babysit and, you know, help all the time, then yeah, it just kind of makes sense. It all just kind of works. And it really does go to show, you know, how much effort that they've put into that. And also in the relationships that they have with third parties as well. When we first tested it out, True Force was quite limited in its support. These days, it's actually supported by 19 different racing titles. So definitely coming a long way there as well. Of course, the quality is always going to be determined by the integration, just because it is a third-party API that games are having to integrate with, rather than just using standard protocols for force feedback, direct input and so forth. But it definitely does work very well in the titles that it is implemented in, so definitely worth consideration there. So until Fanatec have that full force integration, it really just does kind of make sense if you fall into that specific kind of usage category. And I think really where they've nailed these products is really understanding their place in the market, not trying to appeal to the super high-end people, not trying to appeal to the really entry-level people as well, and just sort of really nailing that quality, all the things that you're looking for in a sort of mid to high-end tier product like what we have presented here. So look, overall, this has been a very positive video overall, but there have been a couple of things that I was a little bit disappointed about as well. So it's important to cover those off for you guys as well. So number one was, and we kind of touched on it before, I don't like the fact that they've changed the design of the quick release on these hubs at least, so that you actually have to pull the mechanism to put the wheel on. That was one of the things I really loved about the old design with the original wheel, was that you could just push it onto the rig and it would just snap into place and all be good. So that was one little thing. The more major thing is the process involved in actually changing between the wheels. Now I'm hoping that this is something that they might be able to fix in firmware and software, but as it stands right now, when you pop the wheel off the wheelbase to change it out, the wheelbase actually switches itself off. And in many cases, if you have a game running when you do that and you try to pop another wheel on and switch the base back on, the game doesn't actually detect the base. You have to quit out of the game and then go back in again to get things working. Now you compare that to Fanatec, and I remember one of the videos that we did a long time ago, I actually actually drove down one of the straights around Bathurst, and you guys can see for yourself here, I was able to actually pop the wheel off, put another wheel on, and then make the next turn and actually make an overtaking maneuver at the same time while I was doing all that. And that would simply not be the case in this. Now, obviously, that's not something that you're going to be doing in a practical sense. But if you do just want to quickly hot swap between wheels, that doesn't appear, at least at the time of making this video, to be possible. And yeah, there were a few titles where we actually had to go out and relaunch the title to make it detect. But at the very least, you do have to turn the wheelbase back on again once you've changed out the wheel. So maybe that's something that they can improve upon. But certainly when you compare against Fanatec, it is a lot more streamlined within their ecosystem. Now, we mentioned this earlier on, of course, but I do want to just quickly mention again, one of the things I was disappointed about was that this particular hub here, the universal hub, isn't going to allow you any sort of console compatibility. As we said before, there is that little pin header inside, so maybe that's something that they can change later on, but it doesn't have the Xbox security chip inside it, so it's not going to work on Xbox. And because it doesn't have a PlayStation button on it, it's not going to be able to be paired with a PlayStation either. So regardless of the wheel that you mount on there, yeah, you're just not going to have that console compatibility. But it is great for PC users that they have this. We did talk about the cables from some third-party wheels scraping up against the base, but relatively easily mitigated by the use of spacers or something similar. So no real major complaints there. The major disappointment that I personally had was that these new hubs don't have analog paddles on them, but obviously their market research must tell them that the majority of people aren't using them, or that people would rather pay less and not have them. But let us know down in the comments what you guys think of that. And then when it comes to the shifter and handbrake, look, I mean, I didn't fall in love with it immediately because I've had the privilege of testing out some super high-end stuff over the years, but putting it in the correct context, considering the price point and everything, I really do think they have done a fantastic job of the design here. It would be great, of course, if it had H pattern as well. And personally, I would prefer to have a separate handbrake and then a combined H pattern and sequential shifter, because I think that just makes more sense overall. You're never, of course, going to be wanting to use a H pattern and a sequential at the same time. But of course, most people that have a handbrake are probably also going to want to have a shifter on their rig as well. So in that scenario, of course, you will end up having to buy two of them. But look, in terms of versatility, again, you can stack them, as we showed, to have a handbrake and shifter combo if you buy two of them. You can clamp it to a table, and of course, depending on the table, there's minimal flex there as well. And yeah, overall, it is just a very versatile design. Good feeling in both the handbrake and the shifter as well. I think they've done a good job of dialing in the feeling of both of those so that you're not having to pull so hard that they're going to tear off the table all the time. They've obviously put a lot of effort into refining it down to feel as good as it can, whilst also having limitations of the kind of usage cases that people that are buying this product are likely to actually be using it. So that is all good as well. It would be nice to have some adjustment there so you could actually make it feel a little bit tighter or a little bit softer. There is a little bit of adjustment available in the software side of things in terms of the activation point, but nothing to mechanically adjust the feeling overall. But again, for the price point, not really something that I think too many people are going to be too fussed about. And it is going to be a big step up in quality overall over a lot of those mods that you see done to the Driving Force H pattern shifter. So I think if you buy one of these, you're certainly not going to be disappointed with it, as long as you fit into the mold of who this product is intended for. And I think that pretty much describes everything we've seen here. As long as you fit into the mold, as long as you're the target audience for this product, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's the most high-end stuff available, but for the price point, for the target market, I think they've really done a fantastic job here. So yeah, I would say at this particular point in time, this really does bring Logitech back to being something that I would recommend considering if you are looking for something that's also console compatible. Moser, of course, have recently come out with Xbox compatibility across their ecosystem as well if you buy their Xbox wheel, but they do only have that one Xbox wheel that unlocks that compatibility. So their ecosystem is still a little bit limited in that sense at the moment. Obviously, we'll be waiting to see how they expand upon that. They are definitely one worth considering as well, and I would certainly recommend check out our reviews of their products, which are quite extensive if you haven't already. Fanatec are obviously the other big player in the mid to high end range when it comes to console compatibility as well. They have their own issues with regards to insolvency and customer support delays at the moment. So I definitely say if you are considering a Fanatec product at this point in time, just make sure that you are fully researched and aware of all of those issues. And yeah, I'm happy to say that now we have a genuine third option for console players that's high quality, has a decent ecosystem behind it, and yeah, hopefully we see more and more accessories added to this over time. So it has been a pretty slow start, to say the least. 2 years between when the G Pro released and getting these accessories that we wanted the whole time, but very happy to see it now, and hopefully this is just the start. As I said before, we do know that there are some Momo wheels coming. Those are expected to be available in January of 2025. But yeah, really happy with what we've tested here today. No major complaints, just a couple of things to be aware of, which we've talked about. And it's as simple as that, guys. So yeah, yeah, hopefully this video has helped you out. Leave a comment down below to let us know what you think as well. Do you already own a G Pro wheelbase? Are you excited to get your hands on these, or are you happy with what you have already? Or does this tip the scales for you? Is this something that you're going to consider over another brand that you might have been considering previously? Let us know in the comments down below. Happy to continue the discussion down there. If you do have any other questions, let us know as well, and I'll do my absolute best to answer them. And as always, if you do decide you want to pick up any of this gear or any other sim racing gear, check out the links down in the description below. There's some discount codes there to save you a bit of money, including 5% discount code for Logitech. That does also work for keyboards and mice and pretty much any of their G range of products, so make sure you make use of that. And yeah, it's an awesome way of helping support the work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you as well. And yeah, any other gear as well, chances are we have a discount code or an affiliate link, so check it out. Thanks for watching, guys, and we will see you again very soon. Bye.